Things can get really dicey when you only have one miniature for a painting tutorial, but I think my Ahsoka Tano here for Star Wars Legion turned out pretty good. For priming, I've got Adeptus Mechanicus Standard Gray from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints, as well as my custom 3D printed priming tool. More info about this tool in the description below. And yes, she's missing her head. We're going to paint that part later. I want to start with some base coating. So let's go first with the purple areas of her clothing. And for that, I'm taking a purple color. I got Blasphemer from CvltCraft's line of paints. I'm mixing it in with a light gray to dilute it down in the form of Negative from CvltCraft's line of paints. This is a fairly bright color still, so I want to take a dark blue color. I've got Kantor Blue from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. Add that in to darken things up. Then I'm going to go ahead and paint those areas of her clothes. I've got a similar process for the blue parts of her clothing, but I'm using a mixture of Kantor Blue and Altdorf Guard Blue, both of them from Games Workshop Citadel line of paints. Next up, we're going to do a base coating of all the metal areas of her body, so like her armor plates as well as the hilts of her lightsabers. And all I'm doing is putting down a simple layer of Contrast Black Legion from Games Workshop Citadel line of contrast paints, and this just gives these areas a nice shadow base color to work with. We'll come back to them later on in the process. Now it's time to add some illumination and shadow to the miniature to make things a little bit more interesting to look at. First, you have to imagine where your light source is. For me, it's sitting up here off her right shoulder. This is to match the other hero miniatures in my army, like Sabine Wren I've painted, as well as Jyn Erso. So how this works now is I'm going to start with my base colors. I'm going to work with the purple first, add a little bit of white into it, and that'll make the color a little bit brighter. Highlight areas of her purple clothing that kind of would be caught by that light source, and then repeat that process a few more times by adding a little bit more white, but making that area a little bit smaller. And a good bonus tip here is when you start applying details to a miniature, you want to work with a very small amount of paint at a time, so you're only painting with the tip of your brush. If you tend to get paint all along the entirety of the brush bristles, what I tend to do then is I try to paint with the side of the brush, which makes it a lot harder to control where the color is actually going. If you find that you apply some paint that's a little bit too bright, just step it down to a previous layer and cover it back up, and just keep going until things look good to you. Next, we're going to work with shadows. Similar to what we just did there, but we're going to mix in some black paint instead of white and darken the areas that are kind of hidden from the light source. Now let's do the same process, but with the blue clothing. Start by taking a little bit of the white to get the brighter color, add a few layers of that to the parts of the clothing that are facing the light source. And then the opposite step as well, we're going to take some black, mix that into our base blue color, and shade the areas of our clothing that are not facing the light source. So Ahsoka has some gold armor panels across her body in a few locations. We're going to work on those now. The first step is to take some gold. I've got bright gold from Army Painter's War Paint series. I want to mix that in with a little bit of black to dull it down, and then paint all of these armor panels this color. When painting these sections, try to keep the paint out of the recessed areas. We only want to highlight the raised areas and leave those recessed areas dark. We're going to go over these gold armor areas one more time, this time using the pure gold. Now make sure to leave not only the black there, but also some of this tarnished gold as well. Ideally, the areas that are kind of facing your light source are going to be the ones that are reflecting the bright gold the most. You know what, let's do one more layer. Add just a tiny bit of white to the gold to make it a little bit brighter, and just do very small bits of highlighting here and there on the gold armor. Next up is going to be all the silver armor, and for that we're going to start with a base coat of gray. I've got some more Negative from CvltCraft's line of paints, and just like with the gold armor, you want to make sure you leave those recesses black. Oh, also while you're at it, paint the lightsabers too. Though when it comes to painting the lightsabers, be sure to use very light brush pressure. That will help to keep some of the recessed details black and kind of make them look a little bit more interesting. Now we're going to do another similar step, except this time I'm working with Shining Silver from Army Painter's War Paint series. But when you're painting this layer, you want to allow some of the gray to show through. Therefore, that conveys the idea the armor is worn down a little bit. The more grades you can see, the more worn down the armor is. One more silver step. This time I'm going to take some white, mix it in with the silver to get an even brighter silver, and apply that to a few areas in the armor, such as being caught by our light source we talked about earlier in the video. Now the opposite. Take some black, mix it in with the silver, and color in some of the areas that would be in the shadow from our light source. Now a few last details with the metallic parts. First, we're going to take some of the silver and just kind of give some highlights to the hilts of the lightsabers. And then also, her bracers have some little raised details to them. Add some gold to those little dots that run along near her wrist. For the belt, let's start with the base color, which is a light gray color. I've got negative from CvltCraft's line of paints, and I'm going to paint the entire thing in this color. Now the belt has a belt, so we're going to make that a little bit of a darker color. Take some black, mix it in with your gray, and just paint the middle belt, for lack of a better term. Mix a little bit of white in with the gray, add some highlights to the belt, and also be sure to paint the little ring and rivets holding her belt together, either silver or gold. It's kind of your choice in terms of how much you want it to stand out. Next, we're going to move on to one more step with the gold armor panels, as well as the kind of purple chest plate she's wearing. They need to be given a silvery blue edge, so I'm going to take some bright blue. I've got Simone from CvltCraft's line of paints, mix it in with the shining silver a little bit, and just color in the detailed edge of these pieces. Let's talk lightsaber blades. So both of her blades kind of go from a bright blue in the edges to a bright white in the middle. So I'm going to start by coating the entire length of the blade with a bright blue color. I've got Temple Guard Blue from Games Workshop's Citadel line of paints. Now, over a series of layers, the exact number is up to you, it depends on how much effort you want to put into this. You're going to mix more and more white into this bright blue color, and then paint the blade of the lightsaber again. But you're leaving a little bit of the previous layer showing on the very edges of each of the blades. Now it's time to work on her orange skin color. I'm mixing together a few colors to get something that looks right to me, and that's a combination of Troll Slayer Orange from Citadel's line of paints. I have Sun Yellow from Vallejo's Game Color, as well as a little bit of Leather Brown from Army Painter's War Paint series. Now with any orange-based color, it's probably going to be a little bit thin, so apply a layer, let it dry, apply maybe 2 more layers, whatever you need to get a nice even coverage. Oh, and here's the head, by the way. Time to start painting that as well. At this point, you probably know the routine. We're going to take a highlight of the skin color by adding some more of the yellow back into it, and then just make the areas of her skin that are being caught by the light brighter than the rest. And feel free to add a layer or two of even brighter color if that's what's needed. Then reverse the process by taking some brown, mix that into your base color, and color in some shadow. Oh, and don't forget to paint her fingers too. I just kind of noticed that. Now we're moving on to her lekku, or those head tails that she has. I'm going to start by painting them a bit of an off-white color with a mixture of white and gray. And also, please note she is wearing a headband. We'll deal with that in a little bit, but if it gets a little bit of white on it, that's fine. Now anything based with white paint is going to be one of those situations where you like to use multiple thin layers, so feel free to do that here with this part of the miniature. Just be sure to let each layer dry before you apply the next one. Bit of a recurring theme here with this painting tutorial. I'm going to take some pure white and highlight some of the areas in the lekku that are facing the light source we picked out earlier. And then I want to mix in a little bit of a dark blue color like Kantor Blue from Games Workshop, Citadel line of paints, into the gray-white base skin mixture and paint that in some of the areas that are included in shadow. Now at this point, the worst of painting her head is done, so I'm going to glue this piece back onto her body. And because the miniature is now mostly painted, I'm using super glue instead of plastic glue. Why not save the worst for last? And of course, we're talking about small details. I'm taking some leather brown from Army Painter's War Paint series and trying to paint her headband. Let the brown color dry, take some silver, and paint some of the, I don't know, metal pieces that are on her headband. Once again, being very careful. So now we have to paint some details on her face using white. First up are the eyes. That's a very careful thing. Then you have the white facial pigments, and just be careful. Do the best you can, seriously. And if things go sideways a bit, feel free to take some of your old skin color and clean up the face, because things will probably go sideways. You know what would be a really jerk thing to do as a gaming company? Because probably this miniature that's actually painted on the box is most likely not the final production miniature. I know with Games Workshop in particular that they're actually prototype miniatures they paint up because of production timelines. What if this miniature here was actually like a 3D print at like 2 or 3 times the scale? So that way they could paint all the awesome epic detail and just Photoshop the miniature down to the right size. Anyway, back to the tutorial. We're getting close to the end here. Now it's time to paint the stripes on our lekku. I'm going to be using Kantor Blue. It's a dark blue color from Games Workshop, Citadel line of paints. And the miniature does look at the details for this feature, so I'm going to try to follow along with those as best as possible. And if you go outside the boundaries of them, don't worry, people won't notice unless they're really looking up close at the miniature. Now there are a few last tiny little things I want to address. I just want to clean up the blue highlights around some of her armor a little bit. So it's going to be a mixture of adding some more blue paint to what I already have down, but also maybe adding some of the original base color to clean up some of the lines, just make them look a little bit nicer. Some of the lines between the armor pieces got covered up a bit, and I want to restore the black color there. I'm going to take some of my contrast Black Legion and very carefully run that paint in these lines. To match the rest of my army, she's going to be standing on sort of a dirty, sandy desert floor. So I'm taking a little bit of brown, a little bit of black, mix them together, and making it just looks like her boots and lower legs are a little bit dirty. For a final detail, I want to add a little bit of battle damage to her armor. To accomplish this, because of my light source being above her shoulder, I'm going to first paint a dark silver line for the battle damage. Then touching the bottom of that line, I'm going to paint a bright silver line. And this combination will trick your eye into thinking there's like a slash or a dent or some sort of scratch in her armor. And with that, I think we can call this tutorial complete. Now I know I normally do more of the faster speed painting stuff, but every now and then I like to take on a hero. And yeah, they're definitely a longer process. But hey, you know, hopefully they look a little bit better and they're supposed to be kind of the center points or center pieces of your army, whatever you want to say. Center point, got shatter point in my head right now as a summary of the terrain, so words may not always come out correctly. But anyway, thank you guys all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you want to see more painting tutorials, mostly Battletech, but sometimes other stuff, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time.